For half a century, the Beechcraft Baron was untouchable, every pilot's symbol of power, complexity, and old-school credibility. But when a carbon fiber upstart with car engines and a glider's DNA appeared, the old guard dismissed it as a plaything. They called it the plastic toy until it quietly redefined performance, safety, and economics. The reason this so-called plastic toy buried an American legend goes far deeper than anyone admits. What made the unthinkable possible? In 1961, the Beechcraft Baron rolled onto the scene and instantly became more than just an airplane. It was a statement. Doctors, lawyers, and business owners lined up for the keys, drawn by the promise of speed, power, and the kind of status that came with a polished aluminum badge. The Baron was not just fast, it looked the part, with a gleaming nose, a swept tail, and two big Continental engines slung under its wings. Owning one meant you had arrived. Step into the cockpit and the ritual began. 6 engine levers, throttles, props, mixtures, spread out like a challenge across the center console. Each one demanded attention. Every flight was a dance of the hands, balancing power, adjusting mixture, coaxing the engines to run smooth and true. The panel bristled with analog gauges, oil pressure, cylinder head temperatures, manifold pressure, and tachometers for each engine. Pilots wore their workload like a badge of honor. Managing all those controls was not just about flying, it was about proving you belonged in the left seat. The Baron's reputation grew on stories of cross-country dashes at 200 knots, slicing through weather that kept lesser planes on the ground. It was the plane you bought when you wanted to show the world you could handle complexity, when you wanted your arrival to mean something. More than 6,800 Barons left the factory, filling ramp spaces at country clubs and executive airports across America. The Baron 58, with its longer cabin and club seats, became the gold standard for piston twins, the one that set the tone for everyone else. But under the prestige, there was a hidden tax. Every knob, every lever, every analog dial added to the workload. Flying a Baron meant constant management, constant vigilance. Pilots loved the challenge, but the airplane demanded respect. In the Baron, complexity was not a flaw, it was the whole point. It was tradition, and tradition was sacred. For decades, that was enough. Fuel was the first warning sign. The Baron's twin Continental engines, each churning out 300 horsepower, demanded a steady diet of 100 LL AvGas. At cruise, the numbers rarely dipped below 30 gallons per hour and often crept toward 34. That meant every hour in the air was an $8 per gallon math problem. On a long cross-country flight, the fuel bill alone could rival a car payment. In the 1980s, when AvGas was cheap, nobody blinked. But as prices soared, owners started to feel the squeeze. What once felt like freedom began looking more like a luxury tax. But the real price wasn't just measured at the pump. Every takeoff carried a risk that couldn't be ignored. The Baron's reputation for speed came with a catch. If one engine failed just after liftoff, the margin for error vanished. Pilots called it the red zone, the gap between liftoff speed and the blue line, vice, the best single-engine climb speed. In a Baron, that gap could be more than 20 knots. Lose an engine below the blue line, and you had seconds to react. Get the nose down, identify the dead engine, feather the prop, or the airplane would yaw violently and roll toward the dead side. The textbooks called it VMC roll. In accident reports, it was just called loss of control. NTSB files are filled with stories of Barons that lost an engine on takeoff and never made it back. Even experienced pilots got caught. The workload was relentless, with 6 levers to manage, analog gauges to scan, and cowl flaps to set. There was no room for hesitation. Every knob and dial was another chance to make a mistake. As fuel bills climbed and the accident record grew, owners started to ask hard questions. Was all this complexity really worth it? Did tradition justify the risk? The search for something safer and cheaper was no longer a thought experiment. It was a necessity. Austria, 1980s. While the world was fixed on American muscle and the roar of AvGas, a small team of engineers in Wiener Neustadt sketched something that looked nothing like a traditional twin. These were not ex-fighter jocks or Detroit stylists. They were glider people, obsessed with efficiency, silence, and the art of staying aloft on as little energy as possible. Their background shaped every line of the airplane that would become the Diamond DA62. The first thing you notice is not the engines, it is the wings. Long, slender, almost delicate, with a span and shape borrowed from sailplanes. High aspect ratio, minimal drag, and a structure built from layers of carbon fiber, cured in massive autoclaves. Instead of rivets and aluminum skins, the DA62's airframe is a single flowing shell, strong, light, and seamless. This was not just for looks. Every inch was calculated to extract the most lift from the least amount of horsepower, a lesson carried over from decades of glider design. Carbon fiber mattered. Diamond's philosophy was simple. Let aerodynamics do the heavy lifting. Where the Baron fought its way through the air, burning gallons to muscle past drag, the DA62 slices through with barely a ripple. The glider DNA runs deep. In a glide with the engines off, the DA62 can cover miles for every 1,000 feet it descends. In a world where older twins drop like anvils with an engine out, this was a quiet revolution. Aerodynamics won the argument. Building a carbon fiber twin for the mainstream was not as easy as stretching a glider and bolting on engines. Certification hurdles loomed. Regulators at EASA and the FAA had never seen a piston twin built entirely from composites with a monocoque safety cell and glider-like wings. Years of testing, simulation, and negotiation followed. The DA62 earned its EASA type certificate in 2015 and FAA approval in 2016. Those dates are not just paperwork, they are the moment the old rules bent to a new vision. Certification was the gate. The result is an airplane that looks and feels different because it is different. The silhouette owes more to the Alps than to Wichita. The structure is a product of glider logic, not muscle car nostalgia. And those choices, once mocked, set the stage for everything that followed. Efficiency, safety, and a flying experience that rewrote the rulebook. Efficiency and safety became the new standard. The real shock was not the airframe, it was what Diamond chose to bolt on under the cowlings. Instead of the usual big-bore Continental or Lycoming engines, the DA62 runs on a pair of engines with a family tree rooted in the Mercedes-Benz OM640, a diesel block built for European hatchbacks and taxis. In aviation circles, that sounded like heresy. A car engine in a twin, and not just any car engine. This one is cooled by liquid, with radiators and coolant flowing through its veins. For pilots raised on the gospel of air, cooled simplicity. The whole idea was almost offensive. Forums lit up with ridicule. Pilots asked if they were really expected to trust their lives to a radiator. They worried about leaks and about plastic that might crack. But the logic behind the gamble was hard to ignore. Jet A, the fuel these diesels burn, is cheaper and more widely available than AvGas, especially outside North America. Diesel engines run leaner, squeeze more energy from each gallon, and shrug off the kind of abuse that would cook a traditional piston. Liquid cooling brings stable temperatures, fewer shock cooling events, and in theory, longer engine life. The numbers started to pile up. The Austria A330, based on that Mercedes-Benz block, delivers 180 horsepower per side, burns about half the fuel of a Baron's big Continental engines, and can go 1,800 hours between overhauls, right in line with the best air-cooled engines. Still, skepticism ran deep. The ghost of Thielert, the first company to try bringing Mercedes diesels to the sky, haunted every conversation. Thielert's collapse in the late 2000s left owners stranded and regulators wary. EASA and FAA scrutinized every line of the AE330's design, demanding redundancy in the FADEC, backup power for the electronics, and proof that the cooling system could handle everything from Arctic cold starts to Saharan heat. One regulator summed up the mood. A radiator is fine in a car. In an airplane, you only get one chance. Yet, as the DA62 racked up hours in the field, the early doubts began to fade. The engines did not overheat. The radiators did not rupture. The so-called plastic toy was quietly delivering reliability and efficiency that legacy twins could not match. With every flight, the stage was set for the next leap. A cockpit where the computer, not the pilot, would take over the hardest job of all, managing the engines and making that gamble pay off. Push the throttle forward in a DA62 and something strange happens. Nothing. No surge, no roar, no frantic scan of levers. Just smooth acceleration, where the Baron demanded a symphony of 6 controls. Throttles, props, mixtures. The Diamond hands you a single lever per engine. That is it. The rest is handled by the computer. Full authority. Digital engine control, known as FADEC, takes every variable, fuel flow, boost pressure, propeller pitch, temperature, even engine protection, and manages it in real time. There is no mixture knob to lean, no prop lever to synchronize, no cowl flaps to remember. The system constantly monitors itself, running dual redundant channels. If one side of the computer hiccups, the other takes over instantly without the pilot even noticing. Starting up feels almost like turning a key in a car. Switch on the main power, wait for FADEC to finish its self-check, then hit start. The computer meters the fuel, spins the propeller, and brings the engine to life every time the exact same way. In flight, the pilot sets the power for both engines with 2 levers, and the rest is automatic. Want more speed? Push forward. Ready to descend? Pull back. The result is not just convenience, it is a fundamental reduction in workload. There is no risk of overboosting, no chance of running the engines too lean or too rich, no way to overheat the cylinders by accident. In an emergency, the pilot's focus stays where it belongs, on flying the airplane, not fighting the engine panel. For the first time in a twin, the complexity is gone. The machine handles itself, and the pilot gets to fly. Fuel receipts tell the truth. For decades, operators watched as the Baron's fuel bills climbed. 32 gallons an hour of AvGas. Multiplied by today's pump prices, that lands you at nearly $250 in fuel for every hour aloft. For a charter company, that is not just a line item, it is a wall. Flight schools running Barons had to factor in the cost for every lesson, every check ride, every cross-country flight. When Jet A twins like the DA62 arrived, the math changed overnight. Suddenly, the same trip could be flown for just $90 in Jet A. The numbers were not hypothetical. They showed up in spreadsheets, in budgets, in the red ink that started to fade as the old twins were swapped for new ones. One school manager who once rolled his eyes at the plastic toy pulled up his cost breakdown and shook his head. "I used to think the Baron was the only real twin," he said. "But when you are burning a third of the fuel and getting more hours between oil changes, tradition does not pay the bills." He pointed to a year's worth of logs, fuel, maintenance, downtime. The DA62 fleet flew more, cost less, and spent less time in the shop. The skepticism faded with every billing cycle. Industry data backed up the anecdote. Gamma shipment reports tracked the trend. Baron deliveries dwindled to a trickle, while DA62s shipped by the dozen. Charter operators, flight schools, even private owners all followed the money. The old guard's loyalty could not compete with a $160 per hour savings multiplied across hundreds of hours a year. The market did not care about nostalgia. The market cared about survival, and the numbers made the decision easy. Airspeed tells a story the old guard never wanted to hear. In the Baron, the blue line, Vice, the best single-engine climb speed, sits nearly 20 knots above liftoff. The published numbers lay it out. A Baron G58 rotates at 77 knots, but the blue line does not arrive until 96. That is a gap that matters. Lose an engine just after takeoff, and you are stuck in a dangerous no-man's land. The airplane is flying, but not fast enough to climb or even guarantee control. Every knot below the blue line is borrowed time. Pilots know it. Accident reports prove it. Now, compare that to the DA62. Diamond's numbers show rotation at 76 knots, and Vice, the blue line, is just 6 knots higher at 82. The speed cushion shrinks from a yawning chasm to a small step. In real-world terms, that means the DA62 spends far less time in the danger zone. Telemetry from flight tests backs it up. From liftoff to blue line, the DA62 covers barely a few hundred feet and accelerates through the margin in seconds. The Baron lingers, burning runway and nerves, before finally clawing past the critical threshold. Analysts point to the data. The DA62's high aspect ratio wings generate more lift per knot, and the lighter loading means it climbs even if you lose an engine early. In the Baron, pilots must fight for every knot, juggling asymmetric thrust and heavy controls. The DA62's margin is not just a number on a chart, it is a built-in safety net. The blue line is always within reach. That is not theory. That is what the telemetry says. Step inside the DA62's fuselage and you will find a structure that owes more to Formula One than to legacy aviation. The entire cabin is a single carbon fiber monocoque, a rigid shell molded in one piece, designed to act as a protective cage around its occupants. Unlike aluminum, which bends and wrinkles under force, carbon fiber is engineered to either hold its shape or fracture cleanly, channeling energy away from the people inside. In a hard landing or crash, the outer layers are meant to break off or delaminate, sacrificing themselves while the core cabin stays intact. This philosophy is not just marketing. Certification requires the DA62's cabin to withstand massive loads, vertical, side, and fore-aft, without collapsing. Factory tests subject fuselage sections to controlled impacts, bending, and drop scenarios that simulate real-world crashes. In these trials, the carbon fiber shell resists deformation far beyond what traditional aluminum can handle. The goal is clear. Keep the survival space uncompromised even as landing gear, wings, or tail absorb the brunt of the force and break away by design. Real accident photos from Diamond's earlier composite models back up the engineering claims. There are cases where the wings and landing gear are torn off, the nose is smashed, yet the passenger cell remains largely intact, doors still operable, restraint systems holding. While the DA62's crash record is still young, early incidents show the same pattern. Cabin integrity is preserved and energy is absorbed by the structure around it. The approach is deliberate. Build a shell that protects, not just a frame that flies. For anyone riding inside, that difference could mean walking away from an impact that would otherwise be unsurvivable. Aviation's old guard called innovation a joke, until economics and safety rewrote the rules. Today, every major flight school orders composite diesel-powered twins. The past's status symbols now sit idle as technology redefines what matters at 8,000 feet: efficiency, survivability, and simplicity. Change is no longer coming. It is already in the hangar. The sky has a new standard, and it is not built from nostalgia.